The afternoon sunlight poured gently over the backyard, painting the wooden fence in warm, golden hues. Laughter floated from the grill, the smoke curling lazily upward, carrying the scent of searing meat and charcoal. I'd come over to my friend's house for a casual barbecue, expecting the usual summer comforts, familiar chatter, jokes that never quite landed, and the buzz of neighbors mingling over paper plates. But then she appeared. My friend's mom. I wasn't sure what I had expected. Perhaps a polite, distant woman who would make small talk, smile out of courtesy, and then retreat back into the house. Instead, she walked into the sunlight with a quiet grace that turned the backyard into her stage without her ever asking for it. Her hair caught the light in streaks of chestnut and gold, loose waves falling softly around her shoulders. She carried herself with a presence that didn't demand attention, but drew it effortlessly. When she smiled as she greeted me, I felt the weight of it. Not the casual, distracted smile adults often give to their kids' friends, but one warm and knowing, like she'd caught me in a secret I hadn't realized I was holding. My chest tightened. It wasn't embarrassment, not exactly. More like a flutter I couldn't name, a sharp awareness that left me unsteady. We exchanged a few words, nothing extraordinary. Yet everything about her felt extraordinary. The way she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear as she listened, the light tilt of her head when she asked a question, the way her eyes lingered on me a second longer than they needed to. Her voice carried warmth, casual, easy, threaded with humor. But beneath it was something deeper, a note that vibrated in a place I hadn't known was waiting to be touched. I caught myself laughing a little too quickly at her jokes, overthinking the cadence of her words, the rhythm of her laughter. And when her laughter faded, it seemed to leave something behind, like a shadow that clung to me. Even the faint scent she carried, a mix of vanilla and sun-warmed skin, settled into my awareness and refused to leave. I noticed everything. The soft movements of her hands, the way her fingers curled around the rim of her glass, the graceful bend of her wrist when she gestured. Every detail was small, ordinary even, yet impossibly hypnotic. I wanted to look away, to remember she was my friend's mom, to remind myself of the boundaries that should have kept me grounded. But the more I tried, the more impossible it became to deny the pull between us. Others noticed her too, of course. She carried an effortless confidence that made people gravitate toward her. Yet when her eyes flickered to me, just briefly, it felt like a secret glance no one else was allowed to see. Admiration, curiosity, recognition. It was all there in that fleeting moment, and it lodged itself deep in my chest. By the time the sun began to dip lower in the sky, and I prepared to leave, her smile stayed with me. Warm, teasing, impossibly knowing. It wasn't just a smile. It was a shift, small, subtle, but powerful enough to stir something inside me that I could not and would not forget. The evening had settled over the neighborhood with a soft golden haze. Outside, voices carried easily across the yard. Bursts of laughter, the low hum of conversation, the metallic scrape of the grill. Most of the guests had grown lazy, sprawled in lawn chairs or gathered around the porch swing, but I had wandered inside to grab a drink. I wanted to pause from a noise, a moment of calm. The kitchen was dimly lit, the air cooler than outside, faintly scented with citrus and dish soap. I thought I was alone, until I noticed her. She was leaning against the counter, arms folded loosely, one hip resting casually against the edge. The light caught her hair just enough to give it a warm sheen, framing her face with effortless elegance. She looked at me with a faint smile tugging at her lips, not wide, not performative, but quiet and knowing. The kind of smile that seemed to say, "I've been expecting you." "Careful with that," she said lightly as I reached for a glass. Her voice had that teasing lilt, equal parts playful and pointed. "I hear you have a habit of spilling things when you're nervous." The words landed harder than they should have. My ears warmed, and I laughed awkwardly, trying to hide it. There was no malice in her tone, only a sharpness that felt like a gentle challenge. She had noticed me, not in passing, but closely, attentively, in a way that made my chest tighten. I filled 2 glasses with lemonade, the ice clinking softly. When I handed one to her, our fingers brushed. Just a fraction of a second, accidental, fleeting, and yet it sent a jolt through me, enough to make me draw a shallow breath. I forced my eyes back to hers, searching for nonchalance, but I noticed something I hadn't expected. She didn't look away. Her gaze lingered, curious, appraising, almost deliberate. She leaned toward me slightly, resting her forearm on the counter near mine. The distance between us shrank, just enough that I could feel her warmth, just enough that it seemed intentional. The scent of her, vanilla softened with something faintly powdery, comforting, filled the small pocket of space we now shared. "You're young," she said, her tone light, but edged with meaning. "Do you even understand the kinds of complications you're inviting yourself into?" Her words caught me off guard. My heart thudded louder than I wanted it to. I swallowed, tried to steady myself, and managed, "I think I can handle it." My voice betrayed me, a little too hesitant, not nearly as confident as I hoped. Her laugh was soft, melodic, brushing against my nerves like a warm breeze. "Oh, really?" She tilted her head, one eyebrow arched in playful disbelief. "I've heard that before, and it rarely ends well." She leaned just a fraction closer, enough that I could see the glint of amusement in her eyes, the subtle curve of her lips, the faint crease of her smile. It wasn't a game of seduction, not bluntly, not crudely. It was subtler, sharper, like she was testing me, daring me to meet her glance and not falter. The silence stretched, filled with more meaning than the words we had exchanged. Every small gesture, the way she sipped her drink, the brush of her hand against the counter, the tilt of her head, became charged, part of a language I was only beginning to understand. When I finally left the kitchen, my pulse was racing, my thoughts tangled. I told myself it had been nothing more than playful banter, nothing dangerous. But deep down, I knew better. That conversation wasn't just casual. It was the first step into something quiet, deliberate, and impossible to ignore, a game neither of us had named, but both of us had already started to play. A few days later, I found myself back at her house. The excuse was simple enough. I was supposed to help my friend run a few errands, maybe tidy up after the weekend's gathering. But somehow, the hours drifted, and I realized I'd spent more time in her company than with anyone else. It began with the small, ordinary things, passing her a tray of cookies cooling on the counter, brushing a stray bit of flour from her sleeve, carrying plates from one room to the next. Simple gestures, nothing out of place, yet each one carried a quiet weight. My heart beat faster than it should have, as if even the smallest proximity left a mark. The afternoon light filtered through the curtains in the living room, soft and dappled, casting shifting patterns across the wooden floor. A ceiling fan hummed gently above us, the sound blending with faint music drifting from another room. She sat across from me at first, her posture casual, one hand resting on the arm of the chair, the other curled around a glass of water. But her eyes, warm, steady, and curious, seemed to narrow the space between us no matter how much distance was actually there. We talked about nothing of importance. The unpredictability of the weather, a book left open on the coffee table, the trivial details of everyday life. Yet every glance, every pause, felt deliberate, laced with unspoken meaning. Her laughter came easily, light, melodic, but when she looked at me afterward, it lingered, softening into something quieter, more intimate, as if she were acknowledging that the moment held more than amusement. At one point, she reached for her glass, and our fingers brushed. It was fleeting, accidental perhaps, but the effect was anything but small. My chest tightened, and for a moment the world seemed to stall, caught in that fragment of contact. Her skin was warm, impossibly soft, and though she withdrew with her usual grace, I was left with the echo of her touch pulsing through me. We leaned closer than necessary as the conversation grew quieter, our voices dropping so low they barely carried beyond us. I noticed the subtle things about her, the delicate lift of her eyebrows when intrigued, the soft curve of her lips when amused, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, revealing the elegant line of her jaw. These details etched themselves into my awareness, filling me with a fascination I couldn't quite disguise. She noticed me too. I realized it when she mentioned the way I hesitated before answering or how I tucked my hands under my thighs when nervous. She saw the small things, the details most people overlooked. That recognition, gentle, unforced, made me feel both exposed and understood in a way I hadn't expected. At one point, she leaned in closer to point out a passage in the book on the table, her shoulder brushing lightly against mine. The warmth of her body so near grounded me, even as sparks of tension shot through me. I could feel her presence in a way that was both steady and electrifying, as if the simple nearness carried unspoken promises neither of us dared to name. By the time I rose to leave that day, I knew something had shifted. It was no longer just polite conversation, no longer casual encounters. Every glance, every touch, every shared silence had begun to weave together into something deeper, something I didn't yet understand but already craved. The quiet pull between us was undeniable now, and it left me both exhilarated and unsettled. The late afternoon sun had softened into a warm golden haze, spilling over the backyard like liquid light. I had come over under the pretense of helping my friend clean up after the weekend gathering. But as the hours passed, I found myself drifting outside, drawn by the stillness of the porch. The muffled hum of voices carried faintly through the walls. Laughter, conversation, the sound of dishes being stacked away. But out here, the world felt quieter, more private. She was already there, seated on the edge of the porch with one leg crossed over the other. Her posture was relaxed, almost casual, but there was a precision to it too, a kind of unthinking grace that made every movement seem deliberate. The sunlight caught her hair, threading it with gold, and the glow clung to her like an aura. I carried out a tray of iced tea, the glasses clinking against one another. She looked up at me, and her lips curved into that familiar, knowing smile. "Careful," she teased, her voice light, a hint of amusement dancing at the edges. "You're not used to handling responsibility yet, are you?" I chuckled, trying to keep my tone steady, though my chest felt tight with anticipation. There was always something in her words, a teasing undertone, yes, but also a challenge, like she was pushing me toward a line she knew I wasn't sure I could cross. I handed her the glass, and as she reached for it, our fingers touched. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, but it carried a warmth that lingered far longer than it should have. I tried to pull away, but her eyes caught mine and held them. Soft, steady, unflinching. For a breathless moment, it felt as though she were daring me not to retreat. "You're curious, aren't you?" she said suddenly, her voice calm, low, but threaded with playful sharpness. "Curious about me, about things you haven't even imagined." The words landed in my chest like sparks. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry, and managed maybe. My voice betrayed me. Lower, rougher than intended. What I meant to sound casual came out confessional. She laughed softly, the sound low and melodic, brushing against the quiet air like a secret. "You're too young to handle me," she said, tilting her head, a mischievous glint lighting her eyes. "But do you want to try anyway?" The world seemed to slow around us. The sunlight dipped lower, bathing her in amber light, turning her hair into a halo of warmth. Her hand rested lightly on the porch railing. Inches from mine, and the small, unclosed space between us felt charged, alive. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let the silence stretch, both of us suspended in that fragile pocket of possibility. Her gaze softened just slightly, and for the first time, I caught a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath her usual confidence, a fleeting openness, as though she were offering me the smallest sliver of herself, one she didn't often reveal. We sat there together as the golden light faded, laughter and clinking dishes spilling faintly from inside the house. Neither of us spoke again, but the quiet spoke for us. The playful tension that had colored our interactions from the beginning had deepened into something heavier, more real. By the time I stood to leave, I knew we had crossed an invisible threshold. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was recognition, connection, the start of something neither of us had intended, yet neither of us wanted to stop. Night had settled in with a softness that felt almost deliberate. The cicadas sang in the distance, steady and rhythmic, a backdrop to the quiet hum of the neighborhood. A few porch lights glowed faintly down the street, but here, on her porch, shadows and starlight seemed to weave their own kind of intimacy. The swing creaked gently beneath us as we sat side by side. I hadn't planned to stay this late, but the hours had slipped away unnoticed, our conversations meandering through books, family stories, even small fragments of memory. The night air was cool, scented faintly with honeysuckle and cut grass, and the swing's steady rhythm gave everything the illusion of timelessness. She sat close, not touching, but near enough that the space between us felt alive, pulsing with unspoken tension. Her arm rested lightly along the back of the swing, and every so often, the brush of fabric from her sleeve grazed my shoulder, subtle but electric. For a while, we didn't speak at all. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, heavy, almost sacred. Then, in a voice softer than I'd ever heard from her, she said, "It's strange how easy it feels to talk to you." I turned to look at her, and the dim porch light caught the edge of her face, her cheekbone, the curve of her lips, the faint crease near her eyes. She wasn't smiling, not exactly. Her expression was open, reflective, as though she was admitting something to herself as much as to me. "You don't pretend," she continued, her tone low, thoughtful. "Most people do, but you're just there, raw, unpolished but honest. It's disarming." Her words struck deeper than I expected. I felt heat rising in my chest, not from embarrassment but from the strange weight of being seen, really seen. I shifted slightly on the swing, searching for something to say, but words stumbled out clumsily. "I don't know how to be anything else." Her laugh was quiet, not mocking but tender, like she understood the fumbling honesty in what I'd said. For a moment, she turned her gaze back toward the yard, her profile silhouetted against the night. Then, almost without thought, her hand moved closer, resting lightly on the cushion between us. The movement was subtle, almost cautious. I hesitated, my pulse quickening, then let my hand shift ever so slightly until our fingers were nearly touching. The space between them felt magnetic, as though the smallest motion would close it. And then, softly, deliberately, she let her fingertips brush against mine. The contact was minimal, just the ghost of a touch, but it anchored me more than any embrace ever could. My breath caught, and when I glanced at her, I found her watching me, her eyes steady, luminous in the dim light. We didn't say anything after that. We didn't need to. The swing rocked slowly, the cicadas sang, and the night stretched on around us, infinite and forgiving. By the time I finally stood to leave, I knew something irreversible had happened. That brush of her hand against mine wasn't casual, wasn't accidental. It was a quiet promise, one neither of us had spoken aloud, but both of us had felt. The night had grown quiet by the time I finally rose from the porch swing. The cicadas had dulled, leaving only the occasional hum of a passing car in the distance. She stood as well, graceful in that unhurried way of hers, and together we walked back toward the front door. The wooden boards creaked softly beneath our steps, the sound muffled against the stillness of the late hour. Inside, the light from the hallway spilled across the floor in a pale glow. It felt almost too bright after the gentle darkness of the porch, but she didn't seem to mind. She leaned casually against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely, her expression softened by something I couldn't quite name. There was no teasing this time, no sharp remark poised on her tongue, only a quiet presence, patient and steady. "Well," she said at last, her voice low, almost hesitant, "I suppose I should let you go." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that lingered in the air between us. I nodded, though my body resisted, reluctant to step away. Something in me wanted to stay, to hold onto the strange, fragile intimacy we had built on the porch swing. I reached for the doorknob, but she moved first, her hand brushing against mine as she did. The touch was light, deliberate, but gentle, and it stilled me completely. Her fingers didn't withdraw. Instead, they lingered, resting against my hand in a way that blurred the line between casual and intentional. For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence stretched, heavy with meaning. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain she could hear it. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her fingers curled, weaving into mine with a patience that felt both careful and certain. The world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact. Her hand in mine was warm, steady, impossibly grounding. Yet beneath the calmness of the gesture was something deeper, a pull, an unspoken invitation, a quiet acknowledgement of everything that had been building between us. I looked up and our eyes met. Her gaze held mine with a softness I hadn't seen before. It wasn't playful or teasing this time. It was searching, unguarded, as though she were offering me a glimpse of something she usually kept hidden. "You know," she murmured, her thumb brushing lightly against my knuckles. "Most people would have walked away by now." "I'm not most people," I said before I could stop myself. My voice came out steadier than I felt, though my pulse raced beneath her touch. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, not wide, but real, threaded with something almost tender. She didn't answer, not directly. Instead, she simply held my hand a little longer, letting the silence speak for us both. When she finally let go, the absence of her touch felt immediate, almost unbearable. I stepped outside, the night air cool against my skin, and the door clicked softly shut behind me. But the echo of her hand in mine stayed. Longer than it should have. Longer than anyone's ever had before. That night, long after I left her porch, sleep refused to come. I lay in my room with the window cracked open, the cool air carrying in the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hum of traffic. Yet none of it grounded me. My mind was still back at her house, caught in the glow of the porch light, in the warmth of her hand against mine, in the silence that had said far more than words ever could. I turned onto my side, staring at the faint shadows that stretched across my wall. Every detail of the evening replayed itself. The way she had leaned against the doorframe, the curve of her lips as she smiled, that small, almost reluctant smile, the deliberate patience in how her fingers had intertwined with mine. I remembered the softness of her skin, the gentle pressure of her thumb brushing across my knuckles. It had been nothing, and it had been everything. No one had ever held my hand like that before. Not with such certainty, not with such weight. It wasn't just the act itself, but what it carried, a recognition, a quiet confession, a promise left unsaid. Her touch lingered still, ghost-like, as though my hand could recall her warmth even in the emptiness of my room. I thought about the way she looked at me, too. Not the playful glance I had grown used to, nor the teasing spark in her eyes when she caught me stumbling over my words. No, this had been different. Her gaze in that moment had been steady, unguarded, almost vulnerable. It was as though she had let down a wall she rarely lowered, giving me access to a part of her she didn't offer freely. That, more than the touch itself, unsettled me, because it meant we had crossed into a space where neither of us could pretend anymore. The silence of my room pressed in, thick with all the questions I couldn't shake. What did she see in me, really? Was this just curiosity for her, a fleeting indulgence, a game she knew how to play? Or is it something more? Something she hadn't expected, just as I hadn't? I pressed my palm against my chest, feeling the rapid beat of my heart, and realized the answer almost didn't matter. Because whatever this was, I wanted it. I wanted the way she made me feel, unsteady and alive, nervous and seen all at once. I wanted the warmth of her laughter, the sharpness of her teasing, the gentleness hidden beneath her confidence. I wanted more of her hand in mine. Somewhere in the blur of thought, I closed my eyes, and the memory of her lingered in the dark like a touch that refused to fade. I knew the path ahead was complicated, maybe reckless, but certainty hummed in my chest all the same. She had held my hand longer than anyone ever had before, and somehow I already knew it wouldn't be the last time.